The presentation that John has prepared in the background. Technical gremlins are one of those things that we often find ourselves with. So it might be that we all talk through our presentation.
Yes, I have two. I had one graphic which illustrates the whole thing, and then I was going to break it down into when I talk about more specifics because it's very, very, very interrelated. I can make a comparison to what usually is done on social media in regard to haunted locations and what we do, what we call performance excavations, and I contrast the two different approaches. That approach that is seen basically in all these TV shows and social media influencers, and what we have been doing for a couple of decades as a performance excavation. And I'm making the comparison between the two points of view. And the whole idea of this is to create a different perspective of what's going on at some of these haunted locations, perhaps many of these haunted locations, from an idea of paranormality to an idea of an archaeology of us, continuation of practices that are still retained in memory in different layers of socio-temporal order at a site. So what we do is we don't just do a surface scan and take measurements and readings of anomalies in the environmental conditions of a site. We go deeper down into past layers of different social temporal orders and target our investigation in each of those layers, trying to recall different memories that were part of the experiences of past occupations of that same site. So, and I have space in history. And so what I'm calling is what was there in the past was human presence. What may be there today is still that human presence, becoming an archaeology of us as human cultural beings. So when, oh, wait a minute, we got something here. Hold it. Here we go.
Is that the?
Yeah, that's it. That's a chart.
Mhm.
Oh, have you see this? You see the chart? Okay, here we go. So here we go. This song by Ian Hunter was called "Just Another Night on the Other Side of Life." So what I'm trying to say, hey, let's look at some of these haunted locations from a different perspective, from an idea of human presence rather than the idea of anomalous paranormality. So we have on one side the power investigator and the power investigation. Many times the whole idea is that there is a quote ghost entrapped there because of unforeseen circumstances, how they died, and they're still trapped at a location. From our perspective of what we're trying to do in this archaeology of us is that the haunting presence has a choice. And these are not ghosts per se. They're what I call haunters. They have passed, but they come back as a choice to relive some of their memory and experiences they had at the location. So from a para investigator point of view, it's tech-based field. A lot of it is tech-based field work, and the contemporary, and it's a contemporary identity of the investigator. I don't know if how it's done in England as much as what it's done in many parts of the United States, where everybody walks around with a label on their shirts that says Ghost Hunters of Gettysburg or Ghost Hunters of another place. That is a contemporary identity that identifies you as an outsider, not as an insider, part of the culture that we're trying to investigate. So the ghostly entity, and it's a ghostly entity that should be responding, but does he respond or do they respond to a contemporary identifier of a paranormal investigator or a paranormal or a ghost hunter? What I'm looking at from at a haunted some haunted locations is a socio-cultural based presence that is still comes back to recall their memories in fields of different experiences they had while they were part of that occupation of that space. So we have a dweller who is still there, um, as I guess Hans Holzer used to call this the stay behinds, and but I call it a dweller, a past present who is still there, retained in that particular layer of socio-temporal order. Or we have a haunter, a person who has crossed over that comes back to relive their memories. But the dweller and the haunter is a socio-cultural human being, not a non-human, not a misinterpretation. We're going in from the standpoint of let's see if actually what they have been calling ghosts for many years is an actual specified particular human being at a particular place and time and history that we can identify who it is based on their memory of their experiences and their performances in particular past spaces. So, in a paranormal investigation and the idea of paranormality, we have many times we have places that are in ruin and or abandoned. In England, that's very there's a lot of those places. That's why I love to go to England because I love to visit all of these old historical places, many of them that are in ruin and abandoned. So you get that eerie atmosphere to begin with, and you get a weird sight condition where if you're taking surface measurements only, you're getting deviations in EMF, deviations in temperature fluctuations, and stuff like that, that creates a semblance of sight disorder. But from the perspective that we're coming from, if it's based on memory experiences of past human occupations of particular layers of site occupation, the memory does not produce disorder, it produces order that they continue to perform as they once did in time. So we have a difference between disorder through environmental site conditions and eerie atmospheres versus the idea of the retention of fields of memory of past layers of site occupation that create order. So there's a big difference there. As we go down the chart, for example, we have in a paranormal investigation, many people see shadows, many they're acousmatic sounds, sounds that don't have particular agency with a particular layer of site occupation that identifies a particular occupant or dweller at that site at a particular time, and you have other anomalous phenomenon. And for me, a lot of the investigations that I've seen in on social media and on these shows on TV is that these paranormal investigators and ghost hunters investigate a site the same way from site to site to site to site. They do the same investigative practices no matter the site, no matter the time, no matter the place, no matter the language, no matter the history. It's still a similar investigative framework that they do. Now, in our approach, we look at personhood, which means that an individual may be haunting various sites rather than just one site. And in England, I guess we would say Anne Boleyn haunts various sites. The Tower of London, Hever Castle, where she was raised, maybe some other sites. In the United States, we have Edgar Allan Poe haunting all over the place. New York City, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Canada, et cetera, et cetera. So this personhood at each of these sites is a fragment of a individual social being. Part of their personality aligns with a particular site based on their experiences that they lived through at that particular site, so that we could have the same personhood, the same individual haunting various sites, but each site it's being haunted in a different way based on their experiences at that site that they had visited or once lived. So we have to approach that haunting from different perspectives in each of those sites because the the way they lived and experienced and performed in that site would be different from site to site. So we have a difference between a similarity of investigative practices from site to site to site to site in public ghost hunts and paranormal investigations. And what we do is looking for particular layers of socio-temporal occupation at different sites by the same individual who is now not an individual person, but a individual social being that part of their personality is distributed through various sites. So, on a paranormal investigation, the next layer you have here is paranormal investigations work on the surface of things. It's a flat surface environment. What is being recorded on that surface, and also what is being seen on that surface. What we look at and what we think of is a many sites, many hauntings are multiverse, layers of subsurface sociotemporal landscape settings, not environmental settings. The landscape setting is producing unseen scenes as opposed to what the paranormal investigation sees on the surface. So these unseen scenes are these multiple possible layers of subsurface social temporal landscape settings based on performance practices and remembrance of those practices at that particular level. So, what we do in a performance excavation is to investigate each possible layer at a site of socio-temporal memory and experience. So not only is it different from site to site, the investigation, because the performance practices would change from site to site depending upon the occupation of that particular site through time, but it also differs in that we don't focus on the surface of things, but rather we focus on the layers of different occupations of presence through time at that same site. So it's a lot different. It's a lot more detailed. So, for example, in this flat surface environmental, what is seen, the investigative performance is based on scans, measurements, monitoring on space from various spatial images on the computer, doing vigils, waiting for something to happen, spatial surveys, going around and asking questions like, could you do this for us? Can you do that for us? Well, we do not do any of that. What we do is excavation as ethnographic translation, that each of these layers of socio-temporal order, each one has a particular ethnographic setting that had different that created different experiences and memories of the occupants of that site in time. So we have to dig down to each of those layers, not knowing which of those layers is still haunting the surface, unless we do go down through these layers and perform to the cultural setting of those layers and do scenarios that would resonate with each of those different layers and see what happens. So we don't do that and anticipate, well, this is going to happen at a certain layer. We do the scenarios relative to what was probably part of their experience and memory at a time of being a dweller in that layer through site occupational history. Do the scenario, see what happens. If nothing happens, we go on to the next layer until if we get something, then we stop and just create more scenarios relative to that particular layer. And based on experience, what I'm doing here in this particular webinar is introducing our theory behind performance excavations And I had planned to do in part two would be to show you specific examples of how we're doing these performance excavations. But what I want to do is to do right now, and this the theoretical baseline of what we do is to show the differences between a typical paranormal investigation and what we do in a performance excavation. So, what happens then in a paranormal investigation if you get all these different investigative performances using contemporary scans with technical equipment, scans and measurements and monitorings, and asking questions, wearing clothing that identifies you as a particular paranormal investigator of a particular group of individuals, of investigators, that's all creating a dissonance, a cognitive dissonance with the past layers that may still occupy that site as interactive presences with other memories, experiences, and performances that they enacted at that site. So we can't create a cognitive dissonance by doing something different that was not part of the history of that site. We have to conform to what those site occupations were through time in different layers of experience and memory. So I call this an archaeology of us because it's what past human cultural beings once did in the past to live. And if these are truly in reality human presences, then their memory and experiences should relate to past um, memory and experiences that they had while they were doing them in a certain space and time in history. So you have, I think, in a paranormal investigation, a lot of cognitive dissonance between what they are doing today on the surface and what really exists in layers of memory and experience in different site occupations through time. So what we're doing on the in the differently is performance resonance and temporal entanglement between material objects that they used in a certain period of time and place and the performances that were enacted using that specific material. So if this, what we do in this ethnographic translation is an idea of memory activism, and we are trying to excavate and unearth memory activations that are relating to the memory activism that we do at the site in different layers. So this is what I call performance resonance and temporal entanglement between material and social memories in different layers of site occupation, which is a lot different than what many paranormal investigations do today. So I don't know if I'm making any sense of what I'm trying to say, but I'm just going to throw it out there and see if anybody has any response to what I just said.
Next.
Any questions out there?
So there actually is quite a few questions, but there was a question actually directly responding to what you just said there. Is
Yeah.
that is there a question out there about what it is that you've just described? So if I may, on behalf of this other person, am I to assume that you are costuming and acting and performing in a way of the time period of the entity who may be there, so they would potentially would recognize you in the way that you're dressed, the way you're moving, the way that you're communicating. So that would give it a richer experience because you're also communicating with a spirit in a way that they would understand from the time period that they lived.
And not introducing any new technologies or new behaviors. So I'm trying to use the technology that was used at their time. And what I tell my investigators when we go out to these sites and we're going down and excavating into different layers, you're there in front of a blue screen And this blue screen is that layer of past occupation. So what you're reacting to and what you're performing is reacting to that blue screen, where eventually it's the unseen scenes that you don't see because it's a blue screen. But you have to imagine that blue screen and that unseen scene in a past layer of experience. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think I'm kind of getting the vibe of what you mean by that. I mean, there is a number of questions here. Do you want to continue through and we'll throw the questions at you at the end, or would you want to answer some of the questions that are up there
Yeah,
present?
sure. We can do some of them, and then I can continue and elaborate a little bit more on it.
Okay, okay, carry on then. Thank you.
So whatever questions people have throw out there. I love questions because it gets me to think about, well, wait a minute, yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe I should have done it this way, or maybe I should forget about that because maybe I'm so immersed in what I'm trying to do that I'm maybe forgetting something, or not in, or I'm just so biased maybe in what I'm doing. So I love to hear the questions that other people have when I introduce what we do.
Okay, there is one then that would be beneficial. Kieran asks, could you explain acousmatic sounds?
Okay, acousmatic sounds are you getting sounds, for example, in an EVP, but you don't know the time period where those sounds are coming from, and you don't know the individual who is doing those sounds. For example, you get a lot of, you hear a door opening, or you hear somebody walking down the stairs or walking down the hall. Those are acousmatic sounds. Sounds don't have a particular agency relative to a particular layer of site occupation, to a particular performance practice by an individual in that layer of site occupation, and maybe identify who that individual is. So what we're trying to do when we're doing our performance excavation is, if we are trying to get memory activation, it's memory activation of a particular socio-temporal layer of a particular taskscape in time, where the individual is reperforming their performances, doing a certain activity that they recall in memory. And so the sound that is emanating from that should be contextual to a particular space in time, to a particular performance in time, to a particular use of a particular material object in time. That's contextual EVP, as opposed to something that is acousmatic, which you can identify a particular time and place, and what the actual specific activity is that they're doing, except generalized activity like walking around or opening a door or closing a door. Does that make sense?
It does to me, yeah. I was going to say, do you want to throw a few examples in there? But I guess when you mentioned the door, that's a perfect one, really.
Yes. Yeah, well, what we do is, for example, we go on at our work on Burnside Bridge on the Antietam battlefield. We went there specifically to locate one particular lieutenant colonel of the Confederacy who is still buried on that part of the battlefield, but nobody knows exactly where he was buried. So what we did was, I got the investigators, all females, dressed up, and I looked in the 1860 census of his household, and found out the names of the women who were part of his household. These female investigators personify those individuals, and they were going and looking for their brother, for their relative out on the battlefield, using lanterns, no flashlights, nothing else, and searching for him, Lieutenant Colonel William Holmes, who is still on that battlefield. And so they were going, saying, Colonel Holmes, this is your Aunt Mary. Where are you? Are you wounded? Are you hurt? Dressed as the dress, using that personality from the 1860 census, talking to them, which they would have done during the post-battle, during the American Civil War. And we were getting responses from a male that said, I'm over here. So we went kept on following, and the voice kept on going on, over here, over here. So I located that specific location where this voice was saying over here. I marked it. Then we went back weeks later with a different group of female investigators doing the same thing, and the same thing happened, and the same location was marked again. And who was with us during this investigation was the National Park Service ranger, the superintendent who was in charge of the battlefield. And he heard this as well as us. So what I asked him is, could I bring in ground penetrating radar to go over that surface space where this voice said here several different times during several different investigators to see if there's a disturbance underneath the ground that might indicate a burial. And if there is, to do an excavation there and see if the remains of a soldier is still buried there. So he says, give me the specifications of the ground penetrating radar. So I says, I'm not specialized in ground penetrating radar, but I will get you the specifications. So a month later, I finally got somebody who would do this because it cost a lot of money. And I came back to him and he said, nope, can't do it. I said, well, what's the matter? He says, well, too many people are going on the battlefield now, and they're causing all this kind of disturbance. They go out on the battlefield, they drink, they make fun, blah, blah, blah. We can't have that on a battlefield, on a Civil War battlefield, because you're dishonoring the dead. So that really got me mad because we really focused on that. That was just one example. Another example, we were at the 11th Connecticut Monument of the soldiers who fought at Burnside Bridge, who did the first assault. We identified 36 of those soldiers who died during that first assault trying to cross that bridge. And we did a roll call. But before we did the roll call, I dressed up as one of the officers. I did a specific roll call, bugle call, to alert the men to assemble for roll call. Then we did the roll call, each of those 36 men who died. And we got various individuals who responded to the roll call. In fact, we got one, Alvin Flint. We said Alvin Flint, and in the audio, 2 or 3 seconds later, we got looked like a very young boy who was very frightened, and he didn't respond as a soldier would respond. All he said was, what did he say, Mary? I. And he sounded really frightened. Well, we had a photograph of Alvin Flint, who died during the first assault. He was only 18, barely 18 years old when he was killed. But we got that response. And when we got responses from other men who were older, it sounded like an older man responding. But it's not the response that you would normally get for a roll call during the American Civil War. We were getting all of these things very, very specific to what occurred to our performance excavations, which reiterated what they would do on the battlefield at that place. I even identified the cocoa, which is still in use at West Point and at other military installations, of landscape architecture and how you fight a battle, which was first introduced during the American Civil War. You have COCOA, KOCOA, key areas for the K, observation areas for the O, C, the cover and concealed areas for the C, the other O for obstacles on the battlefield, and A for the avenue of approach where the attack went. And each of those KOCOA areas, we did different scenarios which would resonate with the performances of the soldiers in those areas related to that KOCOA. The key area, the observation area, the cover and concealment area, the obstacle areas and the avenues of approach. And we were getting context-specific manifestations to what they would have done in those specific areas. But 5 different distinguishing audio that would relate to those physical areas. So, I mean, that's really, really specific. Does
That's
that make sense?
yeah, that's really fascinating. I guess building on that, one of the questions that sits at the top actually is one of my own. Is that are there specific periods of historical that produce more of these kind of hauntings and more of this afterlife phenomenon than others? Is it generally specifically the war that you have chosen to focus on, or
No, it's every place we investigate it, we do it from that point of view. And we seem to be getting more materializations based on the performance that we're doing that is context specific to a specific space in that place or landscape, a specific time, and a specific use of material objects. We don't introduce anything that was not part of their memory and experience in that layer of history. So we were getting all these kind of things that were coming out, and I mean, at Antietam, it was just amazing. We were getting things that we didn't anticipate as well. For example, when we were doing that roll call, we would pause with those 36 names. We would pause between the names to wait and see if anybody would respond. So at one of those, we had between like the second and or the fifth and sixth soldier we got an audio, and the audio said, "Is that you, Stedman?" I said, "What?" It was perfectly clear. "Is that you, Stedman?" And we're looking at the 36 soldiers of the 11th Connecticut who died during that first assault toward Burnside Bridge, and there was no Stedman on that list. So I'm saying, who was Stedman? I mean, why is this audio Stedman? Do we pick up an extraneous radio signal or something like that? And what happened was afterwards, I did a research on the 11th Connecticut, and I found out that the colonel of the 11th Connecticut died during the first assault, and he was replaced by Major Stedman. So somebody thought I was Major Stedman because I was the one during the roll call, and we had no clue who Stedman was before that. So how do you explain somebody calling me Stedman as I was doing the roll call when I didn't even know who Stedman was? But it turned out that he replaced the commanding officer of the 11th Connecticut when the commanding officer died during the first assault, and I was doing the roll call as an officer, and somebody thought I was that Major Stedman. Now that I thought was pretty unique.
yeah, absolutely exceptional in terms of response? I mean,
Now we were getting other things. For example, we would do the charge up to the bridge because the fifth thing is the avenue of approach. That's the way the soldiers charged toward the bridge. And we were doing that charge. First, we did that roll call and we assembled them in with the two different bugle calls. There were 37 different bugle calls that the infantry would know during the American Civil War. We just focused on two. One, alert the men to come to attention, and two, alert the men we're going to do the roll call. And that's the tool that we used. After we did that roll call, I ordered a charge up the road, the avenue of approach that those soldiers took to try to get to the bridge. And while we were doing that, we had a live audio feed. As we're going up, we didn't pick it up live, but when we stopped at the bridge and we played back the audio recording, what we were getting simultaneously were three different layers of time. First, we could hear in the audio men screaming and yelling like they were in battle. You hear gunshots. So that was the past. At the same time, in that same audio, you were getting crickets and all kind of insects chirping. Now, if that was the actual battle, there would be no crickets chirping because they would get scared off because of all the noise. So we were picking up the crickets that were chirping as we reenacted that charge. So you have the past of the men recorded in battle with men screaming, shouting, rifle fire, gunfire. We have the crickets, which was a contemporary crickets that were heard as we were charging up that road in the present time. And also in that same audio recording, we heard this motorized sound off in the distance coming closer, closer, and closer. What we identified was a plane that was off in the distance and was passing overhead while we were doing this scenario. So in that same script of time, we were getting the past, the present, and the future occurring simultaneously in the same audio recording.
I mean, that's a really interesting observation you make, and it actually ties into one of the questions that's been asked here from Rob Gandy. Is that does this approach work with the future, and could future performers be coming back to the present day? And I guess that's
Yes,
what you're
yes,
alluding to there. Because do you
yes,
want to
yes,
expand on that a bit?
yes. Well, what happened was that plane, it was off in a distance, so it still wasn't in the present environment, right? It's still a future coming into the present, right? The plane.
Yeah,
And it's coming into the present, but at the same time we still have these men fighting on the battlefield because you can hear them screaming and shouting and the rifle fire going on, and you can have the contemporary nightly scene of crickets chirping, which they would be chirping, but they would not be chirping with any kind of really loud sound like on a battlefield, because there would be no sound from animals or anything like that, because they would be scared away. So we were getting like somehow some kind of a portal that we opened up when we did the charge, that we got that past, but the present was still there and the future was still about a minute off in the distance coming back into the present. Does that make sense?
I, it does. I can understand what you're trying to extrapolate there. Yeah. So, do you, when you are going to approach a site, is there like a cultural, a historical point of view that you want to learn about of an area, or are you
What
go?
you know, what we do is sort of what I call an ethno-archaeological approach. It's the ethnographic translation. These are past cultures of how you lived at a certain site at a certain time in history. So we're trying to unearth that past ethnographic setting, that as an ethnographic translation, a culture in the past, how it was in the past, how they performed, what tasks did they perform in certain spaces, what technologies did they use to perform those tasks, and what are the sensorial effects of that performance material culture entanglement that would pop out as well in the present. And that's what we're also getting. We're getting sounds that directly relate to not what is happening today, but what happened in the past, in a in an entanglement of a performance practice in a certain space in time at inside occupation, using particular tools that they used that created certain sounds that are not acousmatic sounds because they are identified to a particular layer of site occupation. Does
I'm
that
just.
make sense?
It does, yeah. Just building on that, I'm really curious. You're tickling my brain in lots of interesting ways right now. So, if you were to go to somewhere like, say, the example in my mind is like the Clovis culture, the Clovis people who lived around 12,000 BC.
Right.
If you were to go to a site where there were known to have found arrowheads or materials that we know that they exist in that particular area, would you go there with a kind of a preset notion of what you are expecting to hear and expecting to feel, or are you going
No,
there?
I just what I would go there and I would reconstitute that site, reconstitute it by reoccupying it as one of them without expectations, because that would neutralize the context. It would uncertify the context. So we're saying, okay, this is what happened here in a particular time in history. So if you're talking about the Clovis perspective, I would go to that site and start getting some flint stones and chipping them, because there are specialized archaeologists who know how to precisely chip those Clovis points today. I would get a specialist as an archaeologist to go in there, dress more or less like wearing all fur clothing, and sit along a river, along a stream or a river, sit there and just start chipping these stones and have the audio on live feed and see what happens.
Okay, I get what you're saying there. Professor,
Now, I have something here on the other part of the presentation where I can demonstrate what I'm trying to make the distinction of. There's some visuals I have. Do we get that to that, Mary?
I don't know.
Let's see if we can get to that other part.
Escape.
And it's really good. It shows you two contrasts between the past culture and what some paranormal yeah. Okay, go down.
No, that's not it.
It's the other one. Okay.
Should be
Yeah,
this.
yeah. There it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, here's the introduction here. Let me put here just to get this is to get you into the mood of it at the beginning. Go ahead, play it.
Is this it?
And this is what I've done in like a lot of movies that I've been in, like in the original Dune. We were working with a blue screen all the time. We didn't see those worms or anything like that, but we had to act and react as if they existed there out in the deserts of Arrakis. So this is the same thing I'm trying to get in a paranormal investigation. Do you see these two images?
I do, yes.
So you have just a regular, okay, location that is now abandoned and it's in ruin. That's the scene environment. But what we're trying to get in is all these layers of site occupation, the unseen. This would be the scene environment, but this is the unseen landscape. UNSEEN, scenes, SCENES. So maybe this scene environment in past layers of occupation is what happened on the right side. So we're not looking at it from the perspective of that left photograph, but that painting on the right scene. What are the various scenes in site occupation that occurred at this place beneath the surface of the ruin and abandonment? Okay. So again, we're looking at, I'm saying to the investigators, you have it, we're going to put it, we're going to post-production is going to be a green screen up there, and we're going to put in all of these unseen scenes. So you're acting, but you don't to that unseen scene, but you don't see it there. But what is in your head is how people lived at a certain past time, and what their experiences was, and what the tools that they use. So it just like in the movie production. Filming and post-production when you have a lot of post-production work where you have just the green screen and they in post-production, boy, they just fill in that green screen. But we're imagining that in our investigations, how it was at a certain time and place in a certain layer of site order. Now, the other thing I wanted to show, the one with the what you were talking about, Clovis. Well, here we go. Keep going down.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, so here we have, let's say this is like the Clovis occupation, right? Everything is contextual, right? You got this scene? You see it?
Yes, I can, yes.
Okay, so this is everything is context specific. So what we're trying to do is look at you have all different type of activities in certain spaces that they are performing. That's what we're trying to get at. So these create different memories and experiences, and each of these things that they're executing are different taskscapes at a particular layer of site occupation that creates different spaces of memories and experiences. So we try to recreate that. But the next photo is this. This is what they're doing in many paranormal investigations. It's the same scene, but they're introducing a new technology, a man playing the piano, which should not be there. It was not part of the unseen scene. It's the introduction, the inscription of new behaviors and new technologies, the piano, which should not be in that scene. So what we're trying to do is not introduce new behaviors, not introduce new technologies, only work with the technologies that they that were part of their memory and experiences. Throw it out there, act in front of that green screen, and you see the scenario in your imagination there, and just act it out. Do the recordings, the audio and the video recordings that are out of scene, that are not seen by the investigators. Record all of that stuff and see what happens. But immediately we have things that are being recorded and sounds that are recorded live so that when something happens, like a sound or a scene is being recorded, we immediately stop the investigation and respond to that particular sound or that particular scene that is being shown on the video. So we don't just record things and then 2 or 3 days later review the evidence or review the data. We respond immediately to what is happening because if they're responding to our performance practices, we continue through that performance practice until they stop responding. So we're doing the memory activism part, and they're responding as memory activations. We're activating their memory of their particular occupation, of that particular space, or that particular place.
Right.
So does that
Yeah, that covers that. So
what's that?
Jesus covers that.
So can I ask on that? I mean, so when did you first start to develop this as your investigative technique? When did you
Probably about 3 decades ago or more. I kind of started it actually when I was a field archaeologist. And my first archaeological excavation was in 1969 in Winchester, England. And we were at that site, at that time, Martin Biddle was in charge of 5 different excavations at Winchester. And I was working at Wolsey Palace, but we were also working right next to Winchester Cathedral. And we opened up a big pit there. And it was a huge pit that had a lot of bones in it. That's where they used to throw the victims of the plague down into that pit. So if anything would haunt you, it would be entities that were buried in that pit that died from the Black Plague. They just threw the bodies there, hundreds of bodies thrown into that pit, and nothing happened. But I had other experiences during that first excavation that got me to think. I loved Winchester at the time because it was considered a very, very historic place that had occupations going back pre-Roman. So you had all these different layers, but you had a lot of different ghost stories affiliated with Winchester, and we were kind of experiencing them outside the dig site when had our days off. We would go up to the St. Catherine's Hill up there and look at the Miss Mays and going down along the water there. And Wolsey Palace was so named because of the tribute by the Welsh to Winchester of wolfskins that kind of led to the extinction of the wolf in Great Britain. So there was a lot of different things going on there. So that kind of stimulated my idea. Said, hey, let's look at things other than material memory. What is left of the past materially with artifacts? Is there something else still left of the past and all these different layers of site occupation that can be servicing still, like performances, social activities that are retained in memory? Because we have material memory, why not have social memory? So this all started way back when, and I started to write my first books. I think my first book was like 2006, but I've written like since then like 60 more books. But it's all relative to this idea of performance excavations. So I know they talk about the idea, the Singapore thing and the reenactment. This is not really reenactment. What we're doing is actually a reenactor is, for example, the infamous American Civil War reenactors. They go and perform not necessarily in the same locations because they're not allowed on some of these battlefields. So they perform off the battlefield and they do a charge and they fall over dead, but they have their cameras and they're recording things because, hey, they maybe marched 3 days to do this reenactment, so they want to be part of everything. So they're not really responding as a Civil War soldier would respond, because a Civil War soldier would not be taking photographs of what's going on in the scene. But what we're doing is an actual immersing ourselves into particular characters. And as a trained actor as well, and I've been trained in method acting, I really immerse myself into a particular character from a time period, and I don't go out of that character. I maintain that character throughout the investigation during the night. I don't come out of it. I'm still in that method acting of being that individual from that time period. And we do layers at a time. We don't go through 3 or 4 layers simultaneously on the same night, because that would confuse everybody, not only the investigators, but the possible presences that we're doing these reenactments with, because it's different time periods. So it's not really reenactment. It's recontextualizing the abandoned site or the ruined site, recontextualizing it, becoming a dweller in a particular time and period. And I always tell my investigators, we have 6 hour pre-investigation sit down, and I tell them this is exactly like this is the way I want it done, to put it very, very orderly. Everybody has a specific function to do. Nobody's just going to stand around and wait for something to happen or not do anything and talk and do all kinds of things. You have to participate. You have to be immerse yourself throughout the investigation in the characters you're assigned to. And I get feedback during that 5 hours, and I'm not really strict. I make changes. Oh, that's a good idea. So, okay, we'll put that in. Oh, okay, I agree with you. That was a bad idea. Let's throw that out. So everybody has a voice to say. And when we're finished with that 5 hour pre-investigative discussion, everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows what to do. And when we do the investigation, I'm more or less the director. I'm outside. I'm telling the investigators, you got to do more of this. You got to do more of that. You got to do this. You got to do that. So I'm directing the scene, and I immerse yourself. Look at that green screen. That's the green thing. Things are happening there. You react to that green screen. So you have to imagine that life in that time. Don't even think about anything today. And we see what happens.
Okay, I can see where you're going with that. Could I ask also? So you mentioned earlier, you mentioned when there's, you used Edgar Allan Poe as your specific example about that he obviously is in numerous different locations across the US. You know, when you go
Right.
to those different locations, is there a different quality of interaction at different
Yes,
points with the
yes,
same scene?
you have to perform differently, because probably his memory of that location in Philadelphia is different from the memory of the location he lived in Baltimore. It might be maybe a difference of 10 years time period, but it's a different memory and experience of the different locations. So you have to act differently, even though it may be the same Edgar Allan Poe. But his experience and memories of the different locations are different. They're not the same, because it's a different place and probably different situations that he had in these different places, right?
Yeah, I get that. Yeah,
So you have to act to that. Okay. So what you have Anne Boleyn, okay, she's in the Tower of London. But I think she's at where the Hever, or how do you call it, Hever Castle?
yeah, yeah. I think that's Heather Castle. Yeah.
Hever Castle. The way she performed and the way she experienced that, where her home was very, very different than what she experienced in the Tower of London, or what she experienced with Henry VIII in maybe Hampton Court Palace. So you have to adjust your scenarios and your scenography to those different locations. So you can't do the same thing everywhere. So that's why I call, like, Anne Boleyn would be a individual persona in each of those locations, different personalities in each of those locations, because her personality would be fragmented, because it would be different experience and different memory. So if you want to do, for example, a Anne Boleyn or Edgar Allan Poe investigation, and you go to 4 or 5 different sites, it would be different at each site. And I think that's really interesting because you're seeing different things going on with the same possible individual, right? To me, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know.
I can see where you're coming from with that. Um,
And we do that. That's what we do. Like we do and and you can't go on, like I've seen investigators, for example, at Gettysburg, one of the most famous Civil War battlefields in the United States, and people that while they go in there, of course they have to go in at night. It's not important. It could be the day or the night. It's how they experience their life. And I don't believe in anniversary dates either because we have leap year. But I've seen investigators, well, a lot of them go at night on the battlefield and they have to go with their flashlights and they tell the soldiers, "Could you turn my flashlight on?" Well, they didn't have flashlights in the Civil War. So why are you asking that question?
because they contextually don't know what a flashlight is. Yeah, of course.
Yes. And here's another thing. It's not the entity that learns new things. It's the investigator that learns old things.
I like that. Very good. I like that indeed. So,
Yes.
Kieran Farrell, it says from a mediumistic perspective, I would say there are a number of layers at any given location, which could be related to stone tape environmental recordings and/or ghosts, which a medium would experience almost at the same time. Would that be? How would that relate to your investigative techniques?
Oh, you're talking to me.
Yeah, sorry.
I heard you mention Kieran, so I thought you were talking
Yes,
to
no,
me.
yes. So Kieran asked that question for. So
Oh,
for,
okay. No, okay. So yeah, I'm a big fan of I have his biography too. The Nigel Neil. And so I seen that movie, Stone Tape Theory, way back about but maybe
When it first came out.
yeah, 15 years ago or 20 years ago.
Mhm.
So I kind of now what is interesting is now the original Stone Tape Theory, of course, goes back to T.C. Lethbridge in like 1956. The archaeologist turned paranormalist, and uh, the idea what we're doing, like for example, I'm doing the haunted history tours at the Omni Bedford Springs, and the original stone inn of that place was built in 1803, and it was made of limestone. The original structure was made of limestone, and underneath that whole landscape is an aquifer, an underground lake. So we are experiencing a lot of residuality at the site. Just things just pop out and pop in, and I think it's related to this idea of the stone tape with the limestone, the original stone in, because a lot of the wall of that original stone in is still there, and of course that underground aquifer is still there, and the whole hotel is surrounded by 8 mineral springs and a creek and a surface lake. So you got a lot of water and a lot of particular stones that relate to what they refer to in the stone tape theory. So we're getting a lot of residuality, things popping up. But what is interesting, I'm on that first floor. There's the dual staircase. There's 3 dual staircases. And there's also a lot of photographs from the 1880s and the 1890s and the 1900s. And what I have found is on those photographs, it's basically the same individuals being repeated time and time and time again in those photographs. And at that time in history, the being photographed was very expensive, so not everybody could afford to have their photographs taken. But in those photographs that are distributed throughout the whole hotel, it's the same individuals. So those individuals being photographed are the upper class because they can afford to have their photographs taken. Now, what is interesting is, so I tell the guests on the tours, take photographs as long as you don't take photographs of live people. Just take photographs of empty space and see what happens. And guess what? We're getting photographs of individuals from the photographs of the individuals from the 1880s and 1890s that I've identified. And these photographs are in my book, so I'm not making this up. We've identified guest and investigative photographs that we can identify with the photographs from the 1880s and 1890s. So, what is resonating with this activity is it's focusing more on live presence through photography that resonates with past social customs rather than the idea of residuality of the stone and the water. So what it is it's super it's extinguishing any importance of residuality because it's creating a reaction through photography and the importance of the camera from the late 19th century that still emanates today as a resonating act that stimulates past memories of those guests. And if they've come back to relive their memory and experiences at the hotel, they know what the camera is and they know the importance of the photograph. So if they're around, they're posing for contemporary guest photographs, and they're so clear that we can identify them in photographs from the 1880s and 1890s. So that is taking a lot of, so that is not mixing the idea of the layers of presence that maybe it has that creates residuality from the earliest occupation of the hotel to the present day. What is circumventing that is the importance of the camera, the idea of photography, the social class during the Victorian and the Edwardian era, and the importance of having your photograph taken at a time when it was very expensive. And so we're recreating that on the tours and in investigations. And these individuals are responding and they're appearing in our photographs they're so clear that we can identify with them with photographs on the wall.
That's fantastic. That really is. And the
Yes, and
fact
we're
that
getting, and I'm getting photographs from guests, like who are, the whole idea I tell the guests is to explore the hotel, explore the patina of the hotel, what still remains of the past, multiple past in the present, the staircases, the photographs, the documents, all these kind of things. Not only explore the hotel, but also experience the hotel. Who still comes back to relive their very unique experiences that they encountered at the hotel in particular time periods. And I'm on that first floor, ground floor, I'm focusing on the importance of the camera and photography, how it gives social status to particular individuals. And so I'm getting the guest and doing investigations also to take photographs like they would at that time. And we're getting former guests who are there, and it looks like they're posing for our photographs, and we can identify them that are on the photographs from the 1880s and 1890s. And I get photographs from guests after the tour. They send me their photos, and I'm always worried about somebody photoshopping these things. So I'm very, very meticulous about what I see when they say they have something. And just to give you one example, I had a lady on the tour a year ago in July, and she just sent me the photograph recently. It took her over a year to send me a response and a photograph that she said there's a presence on. She said it took her over a year to send me the photograph because she was worried that I would debunk her photograph. So they know I'm not, I don't agree all the time. I debunk things all the time. So she was worried. It took her over a year to send me the photograph because she was worried that I would debunk it. So I looked at her photograph because she says, yeah, right down the hallway there's a little girl in Victorian dress standing there, and has her hair in a bun, and she's looking up at the photographer. So I'm looking at the photograph and I say, oh man, she's going to get really sad because I don't see anything. I don't see anything at all in that photograph. So Mary, she just went up and walked away. So Mary says, well, why don't you zoom in on it? I said, okay, calm down, Mary, calm down, calm down. So we zoomed in on it, on the photograph. Apparently the guest didn't. And when we zoomed in on it, there was the little girl in the photo. But what was interesting, 2 feet behind her, looking at her and looking up the hallway at the photographer was a man. And this woman who took the photograph did not see that man. So that photo was not photoshopped.
That's fantastic.
So that
But
man had a typical Victorian mustache, wire rim glasses, and he had this little cap on. He looks exactly like a young Teddy Roosevelt.
that's fantastic.
Teddy
But
Roosevelt was at the Springs because there were 12 presidents who were at the Springs. He had four daughters. So was that little girl 2 feet in front of him that the photographer saw but didn't see him behind? Was that Teddy Roosevelt and was that his daughter? I don't know. But that photograph was not Photoshop because she did not see him. And we did when we zoomed in on it. So that's how meticulous I get. And I just throw out things when I can debunk them very easily. But I couldn't debunk that because she didn't see him behind her. So I thought that was really good.
I can see the time is about 25 past 8 for us. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of things, okay? So I'm going to leave you with the questions that end up our evening tonight, and it'd be fantastic if you could explore this for me. So, what do you think that your work has on preserving the interest of these historic haunted sites? And is there any
Okay,
particular
I get very angry when they go in there, and I'm not talking about really legitimate, serious paranormal investigations. I'm talking about these public ghost hunts, okay? I get really angry when they go in and do anybody can do this, anybody can do what they want to do. I am really angry with the idea that they are destroying, either erasing or implanting new inscriptions. They are destroying intangible cultural heritage of these sites. So, what I'm trying to do is to preserve that intangible cultural heritage at sites that are in contemporary ruin and abandoned, which are a lot of the sites in the United States that go public ghost hunts explore, and they just go in and do anything. So you never know what intangible cultural heritage is still preserved there in fields of memory. So my investigations are aimed at trying to preserve that intangible cultural heritage as opposed to erasing it by doing anything you want because these are just ghosts or it doesn't make any difference because they're dead. It makes a difference to me because I don't see them as dead. I don't see this as afterlife. I see this as life after intangible cultural heritage in fields of memory and archaeology of us.
Okay. So, and I guess the last point really for me is there any particular sites or historical periods that you're eager to explore next?
No, I go where we get have access to, where we have access to. So there's a lot of sites that, that I don't like to go to sites that have been explored in a lot of paranormal investigations, a lot of public ghost hunts, a lot of things that are on TV. I think they're tainted by those types of investigations. So I have to go through a lot of garbage, trying to eliminate the garbage that are created by introducing new ideas, new concepts, new behaviors, new technologies. I have to dig through that to get to the possible real presence of the subsurface layers of memory and experience beneath the surface disorder. So I try to investigate sites that are not really sites that haven't been that much explored, so I can go in there kind of virgin sites to explore. So that's what we try to do.
I get exactly where you're coming from with that. And I guess we'll draw our webinar this evening to a close, my friend John. But that copy of that photograph, there's a question here, is do you have a copy of that? And if so, could you post it on the ASSAP Facebook page so we can all have a look at it if that's possible?
Yeah, I have. Now you can go on Academia EDU, uh, Academia EDU, John Sabol, and I have like 300 articles. I have all the first chapters of all my books on there. It's a free website. And I have a lot of stuff in there. A lot of the photographs are on that Academia, so it doesn't cost you anything. You can just go in as a visitor, just go academia-edu/John Sable, and you can see about 350 articles, webinars, seminars, every one of my books, at least the first chapter, and those photographs are on the ones related to the haunting of Omni Bedford Springs.
Okay, Julie, I hope that answers that question for you. So,
Question.
Caroline, are you still there, by
Sorry.
the way?
Hi. Yeah, I am. I'm still here. There is one question that we have missed out, though, John,
Yep.
if we've got time to shoehorn it in quickly. Rob Gandy asks, how does the theory allow for cases of flying nuns and Roman soldiers marching up through cellars up to their
Yes,
knees?
I know. I was there in York before it closed. Yeah, that is a great thing because at that time in 1954, when he saw those Roman soldiers marching through, he vividly described how they were dressed and the weaponry they were using, and all the archaeologists debunked that. Said, no, no, that's not right. That's not right. That's not right. 30 years later, they found out that those were not Roman soldiers from Rome. They were auxiliaries from the local areas. So that was spot on. So yes, that does happen. And again, and they were walking on their road, their surface. That happens as well at the springs. We got people to see people walking around, and they're about 2 feet. Their legs are about 12 inches above the contemporary surface because their surface was differently. So yes. Now, what is interesting, I've spoken at many, many different theoretical archaeology conferences, 200 or 300 theoretical archaeologists, like at Berkeley and New York University, University of Chicago, University of Champaign, Illinois. I spoke at the World Geographical Society in London. I spoke at different conferences talking about this. And I get a nice polite clap. I don't get anything coming up and saying, well, you don't know what you're talking about. But if I talk at paranormal conferences, boy, do I get hit. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know you don't, what's archaeology have to do with this? What does anthropology have to do with this? You mean you don't use the K2 meter? You mean you don't do this? You don't do that? No, I could see the difference between speaking to professional archaeologists who will not tell you what goes on at a lot of these archaeological sites because they're still in academia, but go to a bar at night and get them to talk, and they can tell you all kind of neat stories about what's going on at these archaeological sites.
Thank you very much for that. What an incredibly interesting talk, as usual, from you, John. I'm going to love to book you in later on in the year so that
Yeah,
we
I
can
got a
get some
lot
more
of
of your.
stuff. I got a lot of stuff.
Well, we're always happy to have a return from you. It was
Hopefully
incredible. Thank you so
you'll see
much.
our faces next time.
Yes, I will come on half an hour early next time so we can iron out all of these little
Yes.
glitches that we had.
You got
But
to catch me before I look like 90 years old. But
I'm
I'm
sure
still
that's going to be a while.
enthusiastic. I'm still enthusiastic. And go on
Yeah,
IMDb and see all my movies that I was in as an actor.
I've already stalked you. Sorry, I
Okay,
I know
okay.
who you are. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Much love to you and Mary. Thank you very much for
Yes,
coming to ASSAP.
we love going over to England because I love to visit. I'd love to go over and do some investigations on it, but I would be just a bystander. I want to see
Mm.
how you do it. I don't want to be an interrupt with how you do it, but I just love to go to all these historic places over there. Every time we come, we go to try to go as many as possible, but never been on an investigation over there. So I hope of
Well, the next time that
soon.
you're over here, our team will set one up for you.
I would think, and I won't interfere. I won't say a word. I'll just stand back and just enjoy myself.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure that your input will be much appreciated. But yeah, it's 8:30 now. Thank you very much, John and Mary, for popping in this evening and sharing your insights into the paranormal and to research with us. Next week, as you all know, it's Christmas week and it's Boxing Day. We don't have any scheduled webinar that's been put down for you, but Christian Lander has been busy in the Elves studio and he has been working alongside Santa or any other acronym of Santa you wish to come up with. And he has produced a little video for you, which we will put out for members as a big, huge appreciation for all of your attendance and your support over the last few years, but particularly the last year. So we'll give you the link to that next or on Boxing Day so that you can see that. And then it will be uploaded to YouTube for you to have a look afterwards. Again, just to reiterate, anyone else who would like to put their name down for a webinar, we would love to hear you. Anybody who has never spoken before, this is your opportunity to tell us, share with us your experiences and your investigation. So any emails to me, please, at webinars@assap.ac.uk. We're booking for end of March currently. So again, I'm going to hand over to Christian to say a last goodbye. We will see you in the new year where we'll be all raring to go.
Okay, thank you very much, Caroline, for that. So, and everyone for staying here tonight. It has been a wonderful, truly passionate, informative conversation tonight, and a presentation from John. And it was fantastic to hear what he had to say and to share. But so for me and for Caroline, I guess this is going to be us signing off now till the new year. There's a video ready to go out on Boxing Day. It's already prepared for you. I'll be dropping it on everywhere that we social on Boxing Day to have a look back at what we've done this year so far. So from me, thank you very much. Have a good night and take care, and I'll see you all soon.
Good night and happy Christmas.